Absolutely. I'm very excited to have Stephan Wolf here. Stephan is a long and distinguished career as a software and a standards leader. Um, Most notably, he was the former CEO of the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. That's a mouthful to say, so everyone knows it as GLIFE. Um, and he's also been actively involved in the International Chamber of Commerce as a chair of their Digital Trade Standards Initiative, which has really led him to establish just a number of weeks ago in a presentation in Dubai, the announcement and the launching of the Verifiable.Trade Foundation, which he is now the board chair. And we're excited because apparently this is the first opportunity he's had to have a formal presentation to really kind of clarify the goals and objectives of this organization. So we're excited to have him and to hear about this presentation and the initiative that he is leading. All right, Stephan, it's all yours.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start I'm going to turn off the sharing. And Stephan also asked us to, requested that the questions come in. We have a chat channel. So if we can put questions during the presentation there, and then he can either address them during his presentation or afterwards during the question period. Thank you.
So, Ali, Scott, and everybody else, thank you for having me here today. This is remarkable in three different ways. Number one, believe it or not, this is my first presentation to the Trust over IP Foundation. In all these years we have been working together, it was always Carla and Christoph and the others doing a great job there. So I'm really excited. Number two, I'm really grateful for all the things that I learned from you. I mean, let me just state two things, you know, with Timothy and Drummond on the call. These were the guys who introduced me to verifiable credentials, right? I had no idea before that. So thanks for that. And all the work on the governance frameworks and everything else that led to this wonderful piece for the VLAI is not, I cannot put this high enough on my list of achievements together with you. So thank you for that. And the third reason why this is a remarkable day is I'm talking about trust in trade on the day where we have all these tariffs coming out. So there's a lot of talking about other things right now, but maybe under the hood we can help the industry to do some things better than before. With this, I would like to share my slides with you. To begin with, yes, I'm a big fan of zero trust protocols, architectures. I'm a big fan of crypto, key management, all these kind of things. You're not surprised, I believe, about this. But I have switched sides, if you like. With Clive, we created an environment, an ecosystem, and a capability, you know. And now we're going to use that capability for the sake and the benefit for the industries. Who are we? We're a Swiss not-for-profit foundation. 7 gentlemen, unfortunately only men at the moment. 7 gentlemen came together quite some time ago, 1.5 years ago, and we're thinking about how can we help, you know, doing that. And there were all kinds of proposals, but we figured that in the end, a not-for-profit, non-commercial, non-political organization that could provide a protocol for trade without any of these major restrictions that you're familiar with from commercial products would be the right step to do. So I'm very excited about my colleagues and co-founders. Together with them, we have another network of 21 experts. Scott is part of that. Thank you, Scott. And Eva, she's here today as well. Thirtyson is also there. So you'll find some familiar names there. Now, when we look at trade, don't even try to understand this. It gives you a little bit of a hint on the fragmentation and the size of the problem. There are so many organizations that help with trade between a buyer and a seller. Then you have customs organization, you have banks, all these domains. Well, they run with different standards, they run with different tools, they run with different protocols, which makes it really awkward for companies to bring this all in line. There's a lot of manual work still there, and we hope that we can help them. But before we do that, before we talk about, you know, the beautiful new things at the horizon, let's be fair at the moment and talk about the advantages of paper. You might find this funny that I'm promoting paper here. Well, I'm not promoting paper, but I'm saying is there are a number of very much unique points around paper that any technical solution must address. If we do not address these issues, paper will prevail. And number one is connectivity. Everyone can trade with everybody else on paper. It's slow, it's error prone, it's all kinds of issues, but it works. The small shop in the Philippines can trade with a big shop in Japan using paper. And that's a major plus, especially if you think about the SMEs around the world who use maybe, Excel, Word, and other things for their daily work. Fraud is another one. Yes, if it hits someone, it's ugly, but it's rather limited and confined to those who are involved in this paper exchange. Think of fraudsters hacking into systems and chains and protocols and everything else. The amount of damage that this could cause is by far greater. And that's what we need to address as well. So fraud prevention is a big one in trade in particular. Trade is at the moment a growing concern for anti-money laundering regimes because a lot of anti-money laundering globally goes through trade deals. Costs. Well, we're not talking about the big guys, right? The Fortune 500, they have, budgets, they have people, they have everything else. But for the vast majority of smaller and smallest companies, digitalization is not for free. They lack capital, they lack talent, they have no operational capabilities for complex systems. Again, they might run their business just on the PC. Dependency. In the retail world, we have seen how dependency becomes an issue for merchants and acquirers of products from platforms, and with all kinds of issues that I don't want to go into it. In the B2B world, there is no such thing like a big giant monopolistic platform, and I think the reason for that is partially because people fear to put all eggs into one basket and to become too dependent from the commercial interests of the platform providers. And there's no difference between a legacy ERP system approach or a new blockchain approach. The argument is always the same. And paper is peer-to-peer, and that means that the data itself remains between the parties that are interacting with each other and that exchange, documents with each other. So data secrecy, data privacy, and all these kind of things are almost a given per se, because those parties decide whom they share data with, and they can do this in all cases completely at their own discretion. When we talk about the market size, numbers are pretty high. I mean, we're talking about 300 million enterprises or businesses around the world. Some people think it's even higher, of which 160, according to the research of ICC, are equipped with technical gear and computers. Out of these 163 million, there are only 53,000 enablers, like banks, logistic firms, ports, and so on. It's still a big number. It's a big service industry, as you can imagine. But as you can see from the relation, the vast majority, 95% of all businesses around the world are SMEs. Now, when you look at the creation of records, whether it's an invoice or a bill of lading or a letter of credit, whatever the topic is, you have roughly 140 software vendors that are responsible for the generation of 95% of all documents in the world. So the big SAPs, Oracles, Microsofts, as well as smaller ones, they pretty much own this data in their environments. As you can imagine, bridging them is not easy because today it's done through proprietary protocols, by bilateral agreements, API calls, things like that. Standards have not been used much in this area. Despite all the efforts in the last 30 years, we will still find a huge amount of proprietary systems and protocols there. And then we have the government bodies. If we want to go digital, we estimate 1 billion people need to be educated, working for all these organizations in one way or the other. And we estimate trillions of documents at any given point in time in circulation. And this is a mind-blowing number. Now, funny enough, when I ask people in webinars or presentations, who of you is using paper for their daily work? Nobody says yes. And the reason is they all have a computer in front of them. They all have a system how they do their work and everything else. So where does this paper come from? Well, the paper comes from prints and PDFs that are generated when you cross companies or cross borders in trade or cross to customs organization. That's the point where the paper really hurts, because there's a lot of, you have a system, you generate a PDF, you pass it over by email, and it's getting typed into another system again. That's pretty much a reality still. I heard that there are still some fax machines out there in use. So where are we today? We have complexity in the documents and no clarity on standards there. And we want to come to interoperability of electronic records that we can use along the supply chain and finance chains. We have lack of authenticity. As you know, today, systems are mostly secured on a network and system level. So you have firewalls, IP restrictions, all these kind of things. But the data itself is not secured, or let me put it more provocatively, once you're in, you can falsify everything. We want to change this. We want to protect the data itself on top of what everybody else does with network security and system security. We want to secure the data itself so that it becomes verifiable end to end between the origin and the recipient, no matter which intermediaries are in the way. Maybe not for today. There is some legal uncertainty. There are many countries still who do not allow for digital signatures, for instance, where you need wet signatures on paper for certain documents. There's a whole team at ICC working on helping with the Melita rollout, which is a model law from the UN on how things can go digital. Now, one of the first and biggest adopters was the UK. And as you know, the UK law is used in many trade agreements, whether it's a UK company or not. And also very much at arbitration courts and so on. So with the Melita reform going on a global scale, we see now that the foundational work is done for digital trade. Another one is the difficulties I mentioned, for the SMEs. This has turned into the opposite of inclusion. We have entire countries and their business that are cut off finance chains because of correspondent banking issues, AML regimes, sanction regimes, you name it. And we want to change this. We want to, without sacrificing those regimes, we want to make it easier for SMEs to connect to the rest of the world and to have less barriers to entry for them when they trade with each other. And what does trade is? This is a 5-6 layered model, if you like, that we have been working on also with ICC, and we took a little bit further than that. We say on the business level, you have all kinds of information floating around, whether it's RFPs, tenders, offers, contracts, catalogs, all kinds of documents. Once you have an established relationship among parties, then you start with the physical sale and shipment of products. So you have trucks, ships, containers, pallets, warehouses, ports, and all these physical, I would call them already devices or objects. And then you have the reverse payment chain with finance. When you sell something, you want to get your compensation for that, your money. And then there are all kinds of other permutations like trade finance, factoring, all kinds of other things, securitization, insurance is a big thing. And then in order to support this, you need an information exchange. And that's today still, in many areas on paper. So documentation, certification, and all of this is done in paper. If you want to replace paper flows, the information flows with, electronic objects and records, then you have to deal with the question of how you can create trust. And by trust, I mean trust in the law, trust in the governance, but also make the necessary steps, to make the data verifiable, which is the zero trust part of it. But trust is a very important aspect of this. Without this layer, everything is going to be piecemeal, in our opinion. And on the left side, you see the regulators, they fiddle in all these layers, of course, and have a lot have a lot of engagement there. When it comes to the data, there was a very nice analysis conducted by key experts from the industry, and they came up with a remarkably low number of just 36 trade documents that are floating around, types of documents that are floating around. Only 36. And whether it's 37 or 35, that doesn't matter. It's a very reasonable size, a very reasonable problem to be addressed. And it's even better when you look at the interactive web tool for the data glossary. They've broken these documents up into data objects, you know, and data elements. And they figured that we have maybe 200 or 250 data elements, like a position in an invoice, like the name of a company, and so on. So actually, the size of the problem is rather limited. The complexity is with the current landscape, that it's so complicated to do business with each other with all these APIs and all these technical frameworks that are incompatible with each other. And we also worked on trust and trade. I can only recommend this paper because that's the first time where we introduced certificates, verifiable credentials, and the standards underneath to the business community. Our work in Verifiable.Trade Foundation is pretty much based on all the findings that we have here. It's a nice plus for us that so many talented people have worked on these issues so that we can, you know, focus on what's relevant to us. And what is that? Well, we talk about trust and authenticity, and basically we can say that we have at the moment three standards, environments, ecosystem, whatever you call it, that are pretty much in competition with each other. So you have the X509 certificates business, which is a vast business, of course. Many country-based schemes, identity schemes, are, you know, tailor-made around X509. Think of the IDAS one that was entirely based on certificates, and in many other regimes you will find certificates in all kinds of applications. Problem with that is, well, they bring crypto and security to whatever you sign with them, but there are so many different schemes, so many different applications, and so many, you know, kind of like missing bilateral agreements between those who want to use them. The next one is blockchain. This is the latest in the last 10 years where people advertise blockchain as a means to make data authentic, and all of the blockchain applications that you will find will come with their own tools for generating public-private key pairs. Again, the problem is each of these applications does it differently. So even if people would agree on the same data standard, the access to the data would be, again, completely different from system to system. And this is where verifiable credentials come in, where they promise a solution for that. You know, all these discussions about self-sovereign identity and all these concepts, you know, that are floating around. They're basically saying, take the data, take your identity, and go wherever you want. And that is a mantra that we're pretty much subscribed to. Organizational identity. Most of you are very much familiar with the LEI and the VLEI concept. Here we're talking about the VLEI more and systems like that, because what people often misunderstand or have difficulties with is the fact that if I sign an invoice on behalf of my company, I don't want to sign this with my personal identity. I don't want to use my passport, so to speak, to sign a company document. So all the identity systems that are government-driven, where they confer identity to you, like a passport ID card and then the digital equivalents of that, they fall short when it comes to the delegation of authority within companies. That is not something that the government is concerned with or shouldn't be concerned with. That is something that the companies do themselves. And you are all familiar with that. Wherever you go working, you have an HR system, you have an IAM system, you have login credentials to the intranet systems and things like that. So Even authorities like how much money you can, sign off and things like that. Do you need one or multiple signatures, dual signatures, or any kind of multi-sig? All of these things are well known to the industry, but not just in, but not in credential systems, not in a cryptographic way. It's just in internal HR systems. And that's what we want to do. We want to take this data from these systems, from these intranet systems, whether it's Active Directory, Azure Cloud kind of system or others, in order to help creating the credentials for the roles of the people that they play in a certain business context. That is a major building block of that, because we don't believe that you can create these billions of credentials through authoritative organizations or through third parties. This would be way too expensive. You need to go back to the companies themselves and operate this together with them based on the internal system that they have already. Oops, that was too much, very much too quick, sorry. I don't know why I hit the wrong button. Let me go back again. Sorry for that. Now, there are lots of use cases, supply chain use cases we're going to talk about, aviation. IATA just announced a new system for air freight. At Live, we show the use of verifiable credentials for making attestations on financial statements, filings of reports and things like that. Payments can be authorized using credentials. Today, both SWIFT and SIPS, the big payment networks, use digital certificates for that, but that might change over time. Healthcare, and I would rather say pharmaceutical, is also a very important domain for that, where you have all kinds of constraints, all kinds of regulation when it comes to the dealing with information. Just take a product brochure. You buy medicine, you have a leaflet. How do you secure that this leaflet is authentic and can be used with trust? Now, let's talk about trade a little bit. In the ISTTP KDD paper, we stated that we have 33 different document types and 250 different unique data elements. And the funny thing was, the banking commission at ICC looked at that and said, look, guys, we need less, not more. We hated that people bombard us with all this data and all this documents that make no use to us as a bank when we make risk management decisions or when we make credit decisions. So it's nice that you have these aspects on paper, but for us, it's just a burden. We would like to have less. So all of a sudden, the notion of data elements rather than documents come to mind, right? That is something that the world is not used to. People think in documents. Wherever you go, people will talk about documents all the time. But we, as the ones doing the plumbing underneath, we all know that we're talking about data elements that are linked with each other, where you have basically graphs of data connections that you need to model somehow. To give you a very simple example, the name and address of a company occurs on multiple documents, but it is the same name and the same address, hopefully. And to model this is a major aspect of what the UN is trying to do now with the UNTP project, which we're going to take part in, where we look into, how can we standardize the schemas, the templates, and everything else for those credentials, the links, between those credentials. On the technical side, when we ship information from left to right, we want to use verifiable credentials. But importantly here, it's not just an empty data container where you can put anything you like in. We want to standardize the payload of those credentials, meaning that the data model that I was just talking about should be part of the schemas for those credentials. Let me give you an example where this is already happening. When you look at ISO 20022, the payment standards that was developed over 15 years, it's now rolled out. It defines exactly the payload of each payment message in the SWIFT network between banks. So there is no uncertainty on the data that is transmitted from one bank to the other when a payment instruction is coming in. And you can also see here, despite all the political issues, both the SWIFT system as well as the Chinese SIP system both use the same standards. And I think that's a major advantage of those standards and payload standards. Now, all of this, is great. You can create a fancy protocol. You can try to advocate this. You can give it to everyone for free. You can do whatever you want. People are not going to pick it up. I can assure you, if we would try it this way, it would take longer than my lifespan might last. And the reason is nobody wants to change legacy just for a new protocol. Legacy is so persistent. If you have an SAP system and you have spent tens of millions for the application and the operation and everything else, the last thing that you want is to change everything just to support a new protocol. And that is why we have to help the industry, not just with the protocol layer itself, but also with building adapters to the legacy systems. And I explained that in a moment. So let's talk about this in a little bit more in detail. We have an identity-centric approach where we say the legal parties and their representatives are modeled through credentials, and then they want to exchange authentic data. So they sign data with their credentials and send it from left to right. And here you can see how this is done. You have the staff level on the left side, and they sign all kinds of data elements, documents, whatever you call it. They will be then translated into credentials, in true verifiable credentials. They will be exchanged to the other side. And on the other side, people can then verify where the information comes from, that nobody has tampered with it, and all these things. And then they can take the information and do whatever they want with it. And in order to support that flow, we have what we call trade data gateways. Those trade data gateways are the hubs that link to the legacy system and speak the common language in between. Now, all of this should sound really familiar. 30 years ago, when AOL, CompuServe, these kind of guys were around, it was Tim Berners-Lee who invented the World Wide Web with HTTP and HTML. And all of a sudden, everybody could exchange, information. In the beginning, hypertext. Today, you see all kinds of others, And people started to build applications against that. And a typical application that you need for that is a web server. So you have probably your internal system. You have your data on your Oracle database, let me put it this way. And then you would like to expose something to the web. So you have a web server and an interface to your legacy system. And then the web server can translate this into the appropriate standards. We're mimicking the same behavior. So the trade data gateway is like a web server, if you like. It bridges the legacy systems, but speaks a common language between them. All of this is peer-to-peer. That means if party one sends something to party two, no one else in the world would know. Let's take an example. And since we don't have bankers today in the call, they would find this probably a little bit too simplistic, but just for the sake of getting the basic concepts explained, you have a seller and you have a buyer. They negotiate a trading deal. They have orders and offers and everything, and then they want to engage with each other to execute on that. But they need the seller and the buyer bank for instance, payments. And then the question comes, when does this payment occur? Does it occur at the beginning, like we're used to in the retail world, where we pay upfront with PayPal or whatever, or whether it's paid in the arrears, right? With all kinds of contractual terms that the seller and the buyer have agreed upon. If it is paid in the arrears, and in many cases, especially in large deals, the sellers need the money earlier than it got paid by the buyer, and then they go to the bank and negotiate some kind of assurance from the banks that the money will flow if certain criteria are confirmed. For instance, that the shipment has arrived in good order, in good standing order. So these banks take a certain risk, of course, because they take this inquiry, they internally do the risk management, they approve credit lines and things like that. and then, go back to buyers and sellers and say, we're going to fund this deal. And then you have all kinds of others, involved, all these intermediaries like insurance companies, logistical firms, and all others, and they all need to know parts of the data that is floated between buyers and sellers. An important aspect in trade digitalization is if you receive a shipment and you sign it off, that could trigger the payment immediately, or in accordance with the contractual terms. So you can close the loop completely, with, ordering, selling, and shipping, and then, receiving, and then payments, if you use the same standards, which is not the case today, unfortunately. The banking industry uses different standards than the supply chain industry. Both use different standards in the internet world, and all of these needs to be put together. Here, a bill of lading is a pretty complex document. It's a document of title, I think that's the right expression for, which means that a bill of lading is not just giving you the information on the assets that are going to be exchanged between parties and where they come from and who's responsible. It is also something that you would hand over to your bank, for instance, in order to get a credit. And by handing over, it's today physically handed over. You have a signed document, blue ink on white paper with stamps. You hand it over to your bank, and the bank then owns this document so that nobody, can get hold of the goods and that are shipped here unless the bank has approved it and unless the bank has said, okay, we got our money. So this document is not just information exchange. It is also the exchange of ownership. And I would like to say also of control, because ownership and control are not always the same thing. You can own something and still don't have control over it in this particular case. Now on paper, this is pretty simple. You have one piece of paper, that's the original. You sign it, blue ink, and then, stamp it. And then you hand it over to somebody else. You push it, if you like, to somebody else. And then you do not own this paper anymore. Some of you might be familiar with that from your own personal lives. When you buy a car by bank credit and you give, the ownership of the car to the bank unless you have paid your credits. It's the same thing here. It's a physical handover of a document. Now, if you turn this into machine readable data, some kind of taxonomy, ontology, whatever kind of model you have in mind, then all of a sudden data objects can become an issue, because now you can copy the data objects as many times as you like. And how do you prove that a data object belongs to someone or is controlled by someone if it's just a copy clone? This problem is addressed today by what people call tokenization. That means you have some kind of a digital token that is linked to the record. And then you might have a ledger system in place, a distributed ledger in place, where you can see from the entries in the ledger who's the last controller of a certain object. And of course, with the interfaces, people can verify who's the owner, who's the controller of an object, and so on and so forth. So tokenization addresses this issue. Hence, the reason why so many blockchain firms have turned to trade in order to support that. But again, blockchain is a platform. Blockchain is a pretty, centralized, governance, centralized software development and everything else. You have distributed ledger, but we do not have decentralized ledgers. And that, in my opinion, is the reason why blockchain has not become mainstream yet. It's still something where lots of small fintechs and others compete with each other. The vast majority of data today is still shipped via proprietary APIs and interfaces between companies directly. Do you remember the 5 arguments why paper is in place? One was you don't want to become dependent on a platform. Now, if the only solution for this problem is a platform, then we have an issue. And that is what we need to address with Verifiable Trade. We want to demonstrate that you can do tokenization of these documents in a chainless way, in a direct peer-to-peer and chainless way. So let's think this a little bit, because that's a major step for us, and that was one of the things that we have thought the most about in the last 1 year. How can we tackle this? How can we really do this? You know, and I think we found an answer to that. So here again, the trade data gateways, they provide access to the employees, applications, devices, services, whatever you call it. We distinguish between objects and subjects. You see this in the middle part, the exposed credentials. You have subject credentials for legal entities and for employees, and you have object credentials for assets, for devices, all kinds of other things. Both need to be controlled. Both must be equipped with all the means of verifiable credentials when it comes to key management, verification, and so on and so forth. But once you have this, people can really interact with each other by having one trade data gateway. You can connect to all the others. And that is a major difference to today's meshed networks where everyone has to build, bilateral bridges and things like that, or have a service provider in the middle who does that for you. Here, you connect once. And once you're connected, you're connected with everyone else who has a trade data gateway. So connect once, connect everywhere is the big promise of a protocol like this. And as you can imagine, if something like this would fly, if something like this would be, massively adopted, the cost for operation, the cost for development, the cost for everything would go significantly down. And ladies and gentlemen, this is one of my major, takeaways from all these discussions. In the end of the day, it must make commercial sense to do this. And commercial sense is not just in a homeopathic way that you have 5% savings or something like that. No, it must be big. And this could be big. Connect once, connect everywhere is really huge. And you've seen this with the internet again itself, with the with the rise of all kinds of protocols and services. All of a sudden, it became affordable to have a shop window on the internet in a digital way that was unthinkable before that. Now look at it a little bit more in detail. So in the middle line again, what's happening there? I can say, Alice, I'm the CEO of ABC, and Bob, I work for ABC, and I can sign off a bill of lading, or I can sign off an invoice. And Celia is also working for ABC. She is a manager with an authority to spend up to 100,000, and she would co-sign with Bob to make sure in a multi-sig environment that the company's compliance guidelines and everything else are upheld. And then you have other credentials, the object credentials for containers. You want to know who leased a container from which company, when. IoT devices. Today, it's pretty common that you put an IoT device on a container and it measures for you all the conditions during the shipment, whether it's weather conditions, heat, and everything else, but also others. In the future, it's very likely to happen that a container on the ship could order a crane in the harbor. So delegation of authority is not limited to people. Delegation of authority in the future will be also related to devices. Maybe one, personal note on this. Is an AI algorithm a device, or is it a subject? That needs to be seen. We have lots of great discussions right now whether algorithms or agents, in the agentic AI world that act on your behalf, are they seen to be subjects like Alice? I mean, the algo does exactly the same thing as Bob or Celia, or are they considered objects that someone has to control? That needs to be seen how the world develops. Now, all of this is then, sealed in verifiable credentials. As you can imagine, there's a lot of key management going on. All the people, all these devices, all of that must be managed. in a scalable way, right? So no manual interference and things like that. That would be really not feasible. But think of it a little bit, go one level deeper. Something that you have all experienced in the past. You get an invoice, and then you moan about it. There's a mistake in the calculation of the invoice. You go back to the issue of the invoice and say, no, you have to correct this, right? And then the other side will say, oh yeah, I'm sorry for that. Here's the corrected version of the invoice. It's not that easy, because in order to make the whole process auditable, you cannot simply destroy the invoice and issue a new one. You have to issue a cancellation note for the original invoice and then create a new invoice. So you just not ship data, you have actually services that are linked to this data. In the end of the day, well, my colleague Hans, who is here as well, he believes that everything is a service in the future. In the end of the day, you have to model these services. And how do you do this with credentials? Quite nicely done. You simply revoke information and reissue information. So revocation becomes an integral part in that environment. And you cannot work today with these lists of revoked stuff and everything else that you either obey or not. No, this has to be real time. The protocol has to manage revocation in a real-time fashion for you, so that you're always certain when you look at an object if it's valid or outdated. So this is what's happening between those gateways. And there is a paper on our website. If you download this paper, then you will read more about how this is going to be managed, what technology we're going to use. For you, it might not be a surprise that we're going to use carry and ACDC for that. When we looked into the requirements, I said at the beginning, those 5 top requirements for replacing paper. Today, in my opinion, carry ACDC is the only technical choice. Whether this remains this way, or whether other people come up with other things, that needs to be seen. But right now, I would challenge the market when they say that they can solve all of these issues. I will challenge the market because, to my knowledge, you always have one missing piece. It's either not peer-to-peer, or it's not independent enough from a platform. You always have issues, with other approaches. And this is why we're so much interested in doing this in a way that really meets the requirements of the markets. Now, the trade data gateways have another nice feature. So you have on the left and right side the mappers, so the legacy system I spoke about. Then you have the credentialing in between, the signing and everything else, and the floating of information going left to right. Now, interestingly, paper is push. That means I hand over a piece of paper. Now, in this capacity, all of a sudden, pull becomes an option. You could allow people access to your servers to fetch data. You can ask people by giving them an ID, an identifier to a certain data object, to pull that data. So push-pull becomes now a possibility. But when you do that, you need audit trails. You need to make sure that you have a chance later to precisely know which piece of information was authorized by whom, when, and shipped to the other side. And then you see here in the middle, you see these local databases. Could be as simple as a key value store, where you store all the credentials and provide audit paths. So auditors could come in and they could really look into what happened at what point in time. But again, all of this is peer-to-peer. So party A knows everything from party B, but nothing from another party 3, that is not in the mix here. So peer-to-peer auditability is a major advantage of this. And you will be interested to hear there are many, many legal lawsuits and arbitration cases in international trade dealing with the question, which information was available when by whom. This is the solution for that. And think of it, in the end of the day, you think of a mesh networks of TDGs that operate on the internet protocols. Basically, it's it's extending the stack of internet protocols one layer. And then you have all kinds of other organizations that could also be interested in that. For instance, customs organizations. One of my favorite jokes is that there's nothing single about this window because every country does it differently. So you have many single windows. And for corporates who deal with multiple countries, they have, again, to connect bilaterally to all these single windows in order to make sure that the information can flow. What connect once, connect everywhere would bring to the corporates is just in the beginning to understand how big this could be in the end and how much savior and burden they would get rid of. So this is the vision, the big vision. Where are we? First of all, we invite everyone to join the movement. This is not we develop something for the industry. This is actually an invitation to the industry to develop it together with us themselves. It's a typical open source project with all the criteria for open source project. So at the moment, we're, the funders of the foundation have done all the work so far and will continue. But we're now in the process of secure additional funding, developing technical specifications, detailed architectures, hopefully by the end of the year. We want to work with standards organization on machine readable data standards. We want to work with the UN on templates for that. If everything works as planned, and if we find the right talent and everything else, the right software libraries underneath, there's a lot of checking and testing at the moment, as you can imagine, then we can start software development as an open source project next year. And we would always do it this way, that we would do this along pilot projects to see whether we're on the right track, whether people can really use this. Some of the first software pieces that we might want to develop is a plugin for Word and a plugin for Excel that you can do whatever you do, as an SME in your Word file or in your FreshBook, QuickBook, whatever you're using. And that can speak seamlessly verifiable credentials afterwards. So little things that count as well as the big things. We're not scared about integrating this with the big suppliers like the SAPs and Oracles. There's a whole industry doing nothing else but programming these tools and making interfaces available and APIs available. So there's a whole industry. We see that this is also an enabler for this industry to make some money. So there is commercial interest in the use of ISTTP, but not in the development of it. Please keep this completely separate. ISTTP is completely open. We want to give this to the world in an altruistic fashion. But I hope that people are happy with it and start to build products on top of it and make money with it, because that would help with the adoption. In 27, first beta versions and prepare market tests with partners. That might not be for the full suite of documents or data elements. It might focus on those, areas where we find the highest need. But by and large, this is the long-term plan, how we want to commence with this. And as you can see from my voice, I'm pretty excited about this. This is, if I were 35 years old and I would like to build a company around that, people would say, are you crazy? Not going to work. You would not get money for that. But yes, you have to be a little bit of crazy to do that. But right now, with our network, with all the people who've reviewed the documents and gave us positive feedback, I've never heard anybody saying that this is a bad idea. People have questions like, can you do this? Is it affordable? How's it going to look like? All kinds of questions, but nobody has so far really challenged the approach. And that gives all of us a high degree of hope that it will work. And with this, I'm at the end of my presentation. I've not seen any questions, funny enough. Maybe I should give you time to absorb all of this. I would be very happy to take any questions from you via Trust over IP Foundation or directly with my email. This is part of our DNA, that we would like to engage with you and learn as much from questions and remarks and comments as possible. Kali, please.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a really interesting presentation there. So as I understand, then each organization might either host or pay somebody to host their trade data gateway, which is where they can present the authoritative source for their signatures and which kinds of objects or whatever that they're working with. Is that correct? And
Well,
yep, sorry, go on.
we're talking about the installment of a software server, right? So this is no different than installing a web server or something like that.
Yeah.
What's a little bit different is the credentials, the signatures. We will distinguish between, according to the VLEI system, between official role credentials that must be verified and validated by a third party, and those credentials created then by the companies themselves. So that is an additional step that we need, yes, but the rest should be a breeze.
Yeah. So thinking about that, I come from the academic world where we have research data, and we're often looking for longevity of the information of the signings, et cetera. And I was wondering what opportunities are there to archive these credentials, et cetera, so that in the future you could say, oh, this was because there's a certain amount of time that one must be able to go back in order to have disputes or taxes or investigations or et cetera. So, you know, if my company goes out of business this week, my server could potentially come down and that information would be unavailable. So do we have an idea for archiving or preserving?
You touch base on 2 points really that are linked but not necessarily the same. Number one, you do not have to own technology. You do not have to do it themselves. I'm pretty sure there will be people who will provide hosting environments and things for that at an affordable rate. So yes, bigger firms might want to do it themselves, but many others will take it from the cloud as a service. So that's number one. But number two, and that is part of the underlying tech stack that we have with Carry ACDC, you know, we have witnesses and watchers. And we need witnesses and watchers exactly for that purpose. If a company goes out of business and shuts down all of their computers, how you can still verify, against what can you verify then? That is a question that is answered on this protocol level. There might be a little bit of work here and there to do that, but by and large, this is the vision that we have. By the way, this is also a clear indication why a trade environment like this needs witnesses and watchers. If you don't have that, you need blockchain. It's that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing is we have the network of people who are going to issue credentials, and they have the highest interest to make them discoverable to others, right? So there will be also ways, and we're thinking about that already, how you can make these credentials, the ones that you want to be discovered, how can you make them, how can you advertise them in the network? Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from our audience?
I was
It's
going
not
to
a
ask,
question though. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
no, you go ahead, go ahead.
It's just a quick comment, right? Bill of lighting was one of my favorite use case when blockchain technology started, but unfortunately, that's the same thing I put in the chat. There were no.
Hello?
Oh no, Sue, we've lost you. Your voice is really breaking up, Sue. I don't know. Maybe you could try to ask the question again, and if not, you could also type it in the chat and we
Face of
could read
it.
it for you.
I can see the question in the chat. I mean, there were numerous attempts to build blockchain applications around that. Many of them failed. There are still a few around, especially on the bill of lading side. But then you have again competing blockchains, competing platforms, right? So history repeats itself in a way. And with ISTTP, you can actually bridge those blockchain applications because these applications come with all kinds of other functionality that we do not address. But bridging them so that you can go from A to B is part of the equation.
Great, thank you so much.
I was going to say that we're out of, we've hit the top of the hour, but
Yes.
if anybody wants to stick around, please do. If Stefan, you can stick around. I had a question about the incentives and the ultimate customer, because we know, as you've mentioned, that some of the reasons the blockchain solutions didn't really work were because the end users didn't find the value and they didn't want to be locked in. It was too expensive. There's a lot of different reasons. And just to understand, the approach here is that if a standard and the sort of the tooling is developed, then products can be built that can then be sold. So this is nothing to go direct to consumer. It's saying we need the infrastructure layer. Hopefully there's enough people who are interested in tooling that to then go on and build services on top of that.
Yeah, and let me compare this to a fax machine. In order to, be able to exchange PDFs 30 years ago, or not PDF, sorry, paper 30 years ago, you needed to buy a fax machine, and everybody did, right? So there is some money in the world that people want to spend on being connected to others. People pay for their internet domains, people pay for their web servers, but it must be at the lowest possible level, right? That for me is the point. It's not just for the rich ones, and it's not just for the big companies and rich countries. This should be inclusive for the vast majority of SMEs in developing countries, but also in developed countries. Sometimes I have the feeling that when it comes to IT and digitalization, the developed countries are actually the developing countries because we lag so much behind. So it must be at an affordable rate. I cannot tell you what this pricing is going to look like. That's up to the market. But the protocol and everything and the software, everything underneath will be for free. Yeah.
I have another question then about, we have here the trade gateway where the organization is making statements about the things that they are contributing as part of trade. What about people making statements about assets that don't belong to them? So I'm thinking about meeting a certain external standards body or a specific type of ethical, like for the gem trade, a certain type of ethical standard. Where do those organizations fit into this ecosystem that you're describing?
That's a question for another meeting. But let me give you something that might be of interest for Trust over IP Foundation. When we talk about decentralized systems, we're not just talking about decentralized servers and kind of like witness and watchers. We're talking about decentralized governance. See, that is a major thing that people have not understood yet. If you go to a platform, you have to obey the governance rules of that platform. But if you are free to negotiate your own contractual relationship with your counterparties or with the network of your counterparties, when you create your own governance framework, a contract is nothing else but a governance framework, right? Then you are free to design the flow of information to your legal needs. And I think the work of you guys in terms of governance, infrastructure standards and things like that, this is beautiful because that is what everyone is going to jump on, right? So you might create model language for governance for contracts and things like that. And then you have the assurance levels, because then you have auditors and all kinds of other external parties that can, inspect and audit what you're doing and whether it's according to your ethical standards and compliance programs and so on.
Great, thank you.
Keep up the good work on the governance side and the ecosystem side.
Timothy, do you have a question?
More of a comment. I'm enthused about this because of its highly decentralized nature. It's almost like self-sovereign identity, but for trade, because it makes it so that there's no reliance on some trusted intermediary, including a blockchain. Blockchain I now see as a trusted intermediary that both parties to an interaction have to agree to use and trust. This is different. This is a protocol. It's not a platform that parties have to share. It's a language. What is a protocol? It's a language that two parties agree to speak. And protocols, by their very nature, are designed to facilitate interaction between parties that do not trust each other. So, you think about Wi-Fi or TCP/IP or whatever the protocol is. It literally enables parties who don't like or know or trust each other to interact. And how do they interact? They agree to speak the same language. They don't have to trust the same third party. They don't have to trust the same platform. They just need to agree to speak the same language. And so that's what a protocol in its essence is. It's the height of decentralization or self-sovereignty of the interacting parties. And so this is the breakthrough, I think, that Stephan and team have brought to us, is a language that trading actors can speak with each other without having to trust each other and without having to trust any third party at all. Truly peer-to-peer, decentralized governance, decentralized verifiability. And the beautiful thing about this trade data gateway is it also means that the trading actors do not have to change their internal technology. They can continue using SAP if they're an SAP shop, or Oracle if they're an Oracle shop. And the Trade Data Gateway enables that translation between SAP to verifiable credentials, and then the Oracle shop will take that verifiable credential and turn it into Oracle. So everyone speaks their own language in their own system. They don't have to adopt some new platform or some new company or some new blockchain. It really is a nice balance of allowing everyone to keep the technologies and systems they've currently got, interact peer-to-peer with everybody else, and not introduce some new authority that everyone's got to trust. It's really a beautiful symphony that from the trade experts around the world I've talked to, they've never heard of anything like this. They've never considered anything like this because they frankly didn't even think it was possible. So kudos to Stephan and team. Very exciting things ahead.
And Timothy, just to avoid any misunderstanding, there are tons of reasons why people like platforms, because they come with all kinds of other features and environmental things. We're not replacing platforms. I think that should be stated very loud and clear. We want to connect platforms.
Well, two kinds of platforms, though. The platform that someone uses in their own environment. If they, you could call Oracle, if we're an Oracle shop in our manufacturing facility, you could call that a platform. Certainly not replacing that. People get to keep the environment that they have. But the platform that is being replaced and supplanted here is the need for a common shared platform between two interacting entities. That does go away. That is frankly the problem why we don't have interoperability for digital trade in the first place, because one platform after another, including blockchains, have said, let me step in and be the intermediary, the trusted third party that everyone's got to use. And it just doesn't work. Time after time after time for decades, people try to be that kind of a platform. But the generic lower P platform that someone uses for their own technology, that the beauty here is that doesn't, like Stephan just said, that doesn't have to change.
Excellent. So we are most certainly over time, so I'd like to close our meeting. Thank you very much, Stephan, for an excellent presentation.